The second way to use Documate with Zapier is as an action. When you use Documate as an action, you can take data from another application and use it to begin and populate a session of a Documate workflow. You can set this up by coming to the Documate integrations page, which you can find by searching for Documate in Zapier, and then scrolling to either choose a template or select the create and populate a new session from the available actions. The other way that you can set this up is by choosing the Create Zap button from your Zapier homepage, and then you'll select your trigger application and configure your action as prompted in this box. We'll look at ways that you can use several different applications as a trigger with Documate as the action in some following videos. After you've set up your trigger, you'll move on to the action step, which is where you'll choose Documate. So here, we'll type Documate in the search bar, and then we'll choose our action event, which is create and populate a new session. If you're connecting to Documate through Zapier for the first time, you'll have to connect your Documate account here. When you choose to connect a new account, this is what you'll see, and the first step is to enter your subdomain. The subdomain is what you see before documate.org when you log in, and then you'll retrieve your API key from your Documate dashboard. From your Documate dashboard, you can find your API key by choosing Settings in the sidebar and choosing API keys. Then if you click the New button, you can create a new API key. We'll call this one Zapier and click Create. You'll copy that API key and paste it in this field. Once you've connected and selected your account, you'll click Continue, and then you can set up your action. So the first step is to choose the name of the workflow that you would like to create a new session of and populate with data from your trigger application. So here I want to populate my intake form with data from my other application. Once I've selected the name of that workflow, a field will appear for each of the variables in my workflow. So for every workflow, I can choose to skip the final review page. If I choose yes from this dropdown, then the final review page will be skipped when I resume my workflow. If I leave this blank, then I'll see the final review page. Below the review page dropdown, we'll see all of our variables from our workflow. So for each field, we'll see the variable name on top. So here my variable name is client_name. And then underneath the field, we'll see the question title. So here I can see that my variable name is client name, and the question that's asked is, what is your full legal name? Next to each field, we can see an indicator of the type of data that's expected by that field. So next to client name, I see nothing, which tells me that the field is expecting text data. Next to the date of birth, though, I see this calendar and clock icon, which tell me that Documate is expecting a date to come from this field. Similarly, we'll see these two radio buttons, one filled in and one not, for true, false, or yes, no questions, as they're called in Documate. Questions that expect whole numbers, so numbers with no decimal points, will have the 1, 2, 3 next to the variable name. And questions that expect numbers that can have decimals will have the 1.0 next to the variable name. So once we've selected the workflow, we can begin mapping values from our trigger application to these fields in Documate. So when I click in this field, I can see all of the available options from our trigger application. So I can select any of these, and now this value from the trigger will populate in this field, client name, in Documate. I can choose values for each of these fields, or I can leave them blank. If I leave client date of birth, for example, blank, I know that this is a required field in my Documate workflow. So when the continuation URL is followed, the user will be prompted to answer that question inside of Documate. For questions that are dropdowns, we'll see that there is a Documate logo here and choose value, which means that if we click on this, we can see that these are values that we have set in Documate as our options. If we want these to be answered the same each time, then we can just choose the option. But if we want to map it to a field, then we'll click on Custom and find the field that we would like to map it to from our trigger application. If we want to use that custom value, we'll have to be sure that the text that's passed from the trigger matches exactly the option that's available from Documate. If the text doesn't match exactly, the entry will just be ignored. For questions that are set as multi-select questions in Documate, you can enter more than one value in Zapier as well. So here, for the matter type, where I ask my client in which area of law they're seeking legal advice, on their intake, I want to map it to a particular field from my trigger. Again, just as with any other drop-down question, I want to be sure that the text passed from my trigger is going to match exactly the text that I have in my option in Documate. Otherwise, the entry from the trigger will be ignored. Once I select one thing, I'll see that because this is a multi-select question, I can enter another value if I would like as well. Once I've mapped as many fields as I would like to data from the trigger, when I press continue, I'll have the opportunity to test this action. So here I can see a sample of the data that I'm sending from my trigger, and then I'm going to click test and review. When Documate is used as an action, the output is a continuation URL, which you or your team or your client can follow to continue the workflow, and a session ID. When we follow the continuation URL, we'll see that we are brought to the session of the workflow that we created and began through Zapier. Here it's populated with the test data in the fields that we chose to map, and you can see that we'll be prompted to answer any required questions that we didn't assign values to through Zapier. Because the output of this Zap with Documate as the action is this continuation URL, we want to be sure to add a third step to our Zap so that we can send this URL where it needs to go. So maybe we want to send it to ourselves or our team or our client, but we want to make sure that somebody receives this continuation URL so that the session can be opened and either additional information can be collected or the documents can be accessed. So to add that next step, we'll click the plus underneath step 2, the action, and we'll add a second action. And I'm going to come to the body of my message, select number 2, the Documate step, and here I can see that I can include the continuation URL and the session ID if I choose, but the continuation URL is the most essential part in that body of my message. Once I've entered all essential information in this third step and double checked that my continuation URL is recorded so that it can be accessed later, I'll click continue, and then I can turn on my Zap. If you forget to add a third step to your Zap to collect your continuation URL, or if you just prefer not to, you can view the continuation URLs for Zaps that you've run already by visiting the Zap history section of your Zapier dashboard, selecting the Zap where Documate is the action step, clicking on Zap runs, choosing the session you would like to view, and clicking on data out for the Documate step. There you'll find your continuation URL, which you can open or send elsewhere.